begins with a moment that looked small from the outside, but it later became clear that this was the spark that changed the galaxy. The Galactic Council was holding another long meeting, the kind that usually dragged on for hours. Delegates from dozens of species filled the wide hall, each one convinced their voice was the most important. For most of them, it was just another day of talking, arguing, and delaying decisions. When the turn came for the human delegation to speak, the atmosphere shifted just a little, though most species ignored it. Humans had always been seen as the newcomers, energetic, emotional, and often too passionate about things that the older species felt were minor. Many council members believed humans still hadn't learned how the galaxy worked. Some even thought humans took everything too personally. The human representative stood up and explained the incident again. A small human colony on the frontier had been attacked. It wasn't a major planet. It wasn't a wealthy world. It was just a quiet settlement where families lived simple lives, far from the noise of big star systems. They grew food, mined resources, and kept to themselves. They had never caused trouble for anyone. The attack, however, was intentional. Everyone knew it. The colony's signal logs, the damaged defense satellites, and the witness recordings all showed that the attackers had planned their move. They didn't come by mistake. They knew the place was human. But inside the council hall, many species didn't care. To them, frontier skirmishes happened all the time. Small colonies got attacked, stolen from, or pushed around almost every cycle. In their eyes, this was nothing new. It was just one more tiny problem in a galaxy full of tiny problems. Still, the humans explained the situation calmly. They didn't shout. They didn't accuse anyone without proof. They simply said that their people had been harmed, and they wanted the council to acknowledge the wrongdoing and take action against the aggressors. Humans believed the council existed to protect fairness across all species, but the room gave the same reaction it always gave whenever less important matters were brought up: polite nodding, bored expressions, and quiet side conversations. Some delegates barely looked up from their digital pads. A few whispered jokes to each other, assuming the humans couldn't hear. They thought of the event as nothing more than an inconvenience. After hours of discussion, a council leader gave a response that instantly revealed how little they cared. They said that the incident would be reviewed later, and that the council must prioritize larger issues at this time. They then moved on to the next topic, as if the human colony's suffering was nothing more than a line on a list. The human delegation didn't argue. They didn't protest. They didn't force the issue. They simply looked around the hall, seeing clearly for the first time how the galaxy truly viewed them. Then they gathered their data files, stood up, and quietly walked out of the chamber. Their sudden exit made the room fall silent for a moment. A few species exchanged confused looks. Some thought humans were being dramatic. Others suspected humans were embarrassed. But most believed the humans had finally realized their position in the council's hierarchy and accepted it. None of them realized what was actually happening. What looked like a quiet walkout was something far more important. It was the point where humanity stopped expecting fairness from the council. It was the moment humans understood that their safety, their people, and their colonies mattered only to themselves. If they wanted justice, they would have to create it with their own hands. But the council didn't understand humans well enough to see that. They thought humans would simply complain for a few days and then forget. They thought Earth would continue playing the game by the old rules. They had no idea that humans had already made a decision. Outside the council building, a cold calm had settled across the human delegation. They contacted Earth immediately. Their message was brief, direct, and without emotion. They reported that the council had dismissed the case and refused to penalize the attackers. They added that no support would be given through official, political channels. Earth's response was just as simple: understood, Proceed with contingency actions. That single sentence marked the beginning of events that would shake the entire galaxy. The humans didn't threaten anyone. They didn't broadcast warnings. They didn't demand apologies. Instead, they moved with quiet determination. Those who knew humans well recognized the look in their eyes, focused, steady, and ready. But most species had never seen that side of humanity. They only saw the cheerful explorers, the curious researchers, the friendly traders. They didn't know what humans became when their people were harmed. Back inside the council hall, the meeting continued as if nothing had happened. Delegates argued about trade routes, territorial markers, and resource taxes. They barely noticed that the humans were gone. Only a few species felt a strange unease, a kind of instinctive warning that something important had just occurred. But even they couldn't explain it clearly. It was just a feeling, something in the air, like the moment before a distant storm breaks. Hours later, as the meeting ended, one delegate finally asked, "Where did the humans go?" Someone else shrugged and said, "Probably back to their ship. They'll calm down." Another delegate laughed and added, "Humans always act strong, but they don't have the will to do anything major." It was a mistake they would all soon regret, because while the council members returned to their comfortable chambers, the humans were already preparing to take action. They gathered every detail of the colony attack, every sensor reading, every ship signature, every movement recorded by nearby stations. They didn't do it for the council. They did it for themselves. They also sent encrypted orders to their fleets, to their bases, and to their intelligence units scattered across the frontier. Those who received the orders didn't question them. They simply began to move. Back on Earth, the message spread through secure channels. The leadership met privately, avoiding the usual diplomatic language. They talked plainly. Lives had been lost. They had asked for help and received nothing. And now they had to respond, not out of anger, but out of duty. Humanity had always been known for patience, kindness, cooperation, and creativity. But when someone hurt their people, a different side emerged, a side the galaxy had rarely seen, but would soon witness clearly. This was the quiet calm before everything changed. The council still believed the problem was over. They thought humans would accept their decision and continue attending meetings like always. They didn't realize that, at that very moment, human fleets were waking up, reactivating systems, redirecting resources, and planning movements with unsettling precision. The galaxy had underestimated Earth many times before. They had misunderstood human determination, human loyalty, and human instinct to protect their own. But this time, the underestimation would cost them far more than embarrassment. It would force the entire council to confront a truth they had ignored for too long. Humans were peaceful by choice, not by weakness. And when pushed too far, their response was something the galaxy was not prepared for. The meeting that everyone thought was ordinary became the moment that set a massive change in motion. What the council saw as a tiny issue was, in reality, the start of a chain reaction that would shake their foundations. While they finished their day with relaxed conversations and light discussions, humanity was already preparing for something the council never imagined they were capable of. Soon, the galaxy would learn how wrong they had been. After the quiet exit from the council meeting, humanity didn't waste a single moment. Back on Earth and in all human-controlled sectors, systems that had been idle for years suddenly activated. Communications channels buzzed, sensor arrays powered up, and fleets that were once considered routine were now moving with precision. No one outside Earth fully understood what was happening, and that was exactly how humans wanted it. At first, other species didn't notice anything unusual. Space is vast, and movements happen all the time. Fleets shift to different patrol areas. Colonies receive supplies, and research stations perform drills. To outsiders, human fleets seemed like a routine redistribution. But anyone who knew how humans operated could see a pattern forming. Everything was deliberate, coordinated, and fast. Signals that humans usually left open were now encrypted. Traffic was rerouted, and every movement seemed calculated to avoid early detection. Some species, particularly those closer to human territory, began noticing irregularities. Sensor logs showed multiple ships moving from one sector to another without clear reason. Trading stations reported sudden surges in supplies, fuel, and weapon shipments. Mining colonies received new defense equipment. At first, everyone assumed humans were just preparing for some large-scale project or exploration mission. But then whispers began quiet rumors that something bigger was happening. Humans were not known for secrecy and exploration, but in times of crisis, they were meticulous. Observers across the galaxy began to pick up patterns that didn't make sense. Supply convoys were unusually fast. Ships were taking routes that avoided standard checkpoints. Communications were minimal and encrypted. Even minor outposts that normally relied on civilian oversight now showed coordinated military readiness. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. Those who noticed felt a cold sense of caution, though none could fully understand why. Meanwhile, humans weren't acting out of panic. Every move had a purpose, guided by careful calculations and the principle of protecting their people. They were mobilizing to ensure that if the Council refused justice, humanity could respond on its own. And every step was designed to minimize harm to innocents. Their goal wasn't chaos or conquest, it was precision. It was the beginning of a reprisal that would send a clear message to everyone who thought humans were weak. Within the human leadership, there was no shouting, no chaos, no debates about morality or emotion. Decisions were made calmly and executed swiftly. Units were given exact instructions, and contingencies were planned for every possible reaction. Humans studied the aggressor species, their fleets, and even their allies. They did not underestimate anyone, and yet there was no unnecessary aggression. Every movement was strategic. Across the galaxy, species who monitored humans began to talk. Traders, scouts, and miner colonies reported that human fleets were moving in ways that didn't align with exploration or trade. One observer commented, "I've never seen humans operate like this. They are usually slow to respond, but now everything is precise." Others dismissed it as paranoia, refusing to believe a species they had often mocked could act with such coordination and foresight. Back on Earth, the human population remained largely unaware of the full scale of the operation. Citizens saw increased fleet activity and more supplies being sent to frontier colonies, but it seemed normal part of their duty to protect settlements. Only those directly involved in planning, commanding, or monitoring the fleets knew the full picture. Even among them, there was a sense of calm determination rather than fear or anger. Humans had a strong sense of responsibility for their people, and that drove everything they did. At the frontier, where the attacked colony had once been, humans quietly reinforced defenses and rebuilt what had been damaged. Sensors that had been offline were now fully operational. Defensive ships patrolled borders that had previously been lightly guarded. Humans didn't announce these changes. They didn't send messages warning others. They simply prepared. And that silence, strangely enough, made the presence of humanity even more noticeable to those watching. Reports eventually reached the Galactic Council, though not officially. Trading guilds, scouts, and distant allies began noticing the sudden changes in human activity. They sent reports that humans were acting differently, mobilizing quickly, and reinforcing sectors that were not typically threatened. For the first time, some council members paused. They wondered if they had misjudged humans. A few species quietly tried to investigate, sending observation ships closer to human territory. But humans had anticipated this. Signals were masked, and observation ships were rerouted or detected before they could gather useful information. As the days passed, humans continued to move subtly but decisively. They didn't attack anyone, but their readiness was undeniable. All eyes who had worked with humans before could sense the shift. They knew that something had happened in the council chambers, though they didn't know the details. They knew humans had been dismissed, and they knew humans were now taking steps on their own terms. That understanding alone changed the perception of humans across multiple sectors. The aggressor species, the one that had attacked the colony, noticed human activity too. Their fleets were moving in unusual ways. Defensive satellites were being upgraded, and human ships appeared to patrol areas they had never focused on before. At first, they assumed it was routine preparation. Then reports came in from human scouts. They were mapping every military installation, tracking fleet movements, and monitoring supply lines. The aggressors began to realize that humans were not just recovering, they were preparing to respond. Despite all this, humans maintained restraint. No civilian worlds were attacked. No innocent species were harmed. They were only gathering information and strengthening positions. Their actions sent a clear signal. Humans were ready to defend themselves, and any aggression would meet an immediate and precise response. The galaxy had long misunderstood humanity. Many species assumed that humans were emotional, reckless, and unpredictable. What they were now seeing was the opposite: deliberate, disciplined, and unyielding determination. Inside the Galactic Council, confusion grew. Delegates began hearing rumors that human fleets were moving faster than previously thought, that frontier colonies were now heavily defended, and that humans had coordinated actions that no other species could achieve without weeks of planning. Panic began to ripple quietly through the chambers. They had underestimated humanity for decades. They had assumed humans could be ignored, overlooked, or dismissed. And now it seemed that ignoring them might have been the gravest mistake the Council had ever made. At the same time, humans maintained a level of invisibility. They did not broadcast their actions. They did not make threats or ultimatums. Everything was precise, efficient, and silent. They wanted the galaxy to notice, but not because they sought recognition. They wanted it to see the consequences of dismissing humanity's concerns. Every fleet movement, every reinforced colony, every sensor activation was a silent message. We are ready, and we will act if necessary. Humans also strengthened communication networks within their own colonies. They made sure everyone could reach Earth or nearby bases quickly. They shared information about potential threats and coordinated strategies for defense. But they did not alarm anyone. They treated every colony as part of a family, ensuring safety and readiness without causing panic. Humans had a way of balancing calm discipline with urgency, and it became more obvious with every passing day. As whispers of human activity spread, other species began to change their behavior. Some started cautiously approaching humans, wondering if they should form alliances or rethink old grudges. Others tried to gather intelligence, only to find human countermeasures carefully masking movements. Even neutral species who had rarely interacted with humans began to respect their efficiency, discipline, and quiet determination. Humanity was no longer seen as a small, naive species. They had become something much more formidable without ever firing a single shot. By the end of the first few weeks, a pattern was clear. Humans were preparing for a response that the galaxy had not anticipated. They were not acting out of anger. They were acting out of duty. They had been dismissed, their people had been harmed, and the Council had done nothing. Humanity was taking responsibility into its own hands, and the galaxy would soon see what that truly meant. For the first time, humans were showing the side of themselves that the Council had underestimated for centuries. They were careful, intelligent, patient, and precise, but also unyielding. Those qualities, combined with their growing technological and strategic capabilities, made humans a species that could no longer be ignored or underestimated. The galaxy was watching, even if it did not yet fully understand what was coming. Humans continued their preparations, always calm, always disciplined. They coordinated fleets, strengthened colonies, reinforced defenses, and monitored every potential threat. They did not boast, they did not brag, and they did not announce their plans. They simply moved forward with quiet, relentless purpose. And somewhere, in the hearts of their leadership, they knew that when the time came, their reprisal would not be an emotional outburst, it would be a clear, decisive action that the galaxy could not ignore. The Galactic Council might have to. By the time humans began their response, the galaxy had no idea what was happening. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly. Outposts near the attacked colony reported small, routine patrols of human ships, nothing unusual to the untrained eye. But those patrols were not routine. Each ship had a purpose. Each route was carefully planned. Each crew knew exactly what to do and when to do it. The humans were no longer just defending. They were taking the first steps toward delivering a clear message. The aggressor species had not expected this. They believed that after the Council dismissed the matter, humans would do what they always seemed to do: complain, fume, and eventually return to their own affairs. They had assumed humans would be too weak, too scattered, or too naive to respond on a larger scale. But now, the humans were proving them wrong, and they had no idea how to react. The first human maneuvers were precise and limited to military targets. No civilians were harmed, and no settlements were touched. Human ships targeted command centers, weapons depots, and strategic points that could allow future attacks. Every move was carefully calculated to weaken the aggressor's ability to harm humans again, without causing unnecessary chaos. The precision of it stunned even those who had long studied humans and believed they understood them. From a distance, the galaxy began to notice. Observers on neutral worlds reported unusual activity. Communications that were normally open had been limited. Supply convoys were being tracked and moved in unexpected ways. Ships seemed to appear in areas without explanation. Some species began to whisper among themselves, "Humans are not what we thought. They are capable of more than we realized." But most still underestimated just how far humans could go when protecting their own. The humans themselves remained calm. There was no celebration. There was no shouting or emotional outburst. Every ship, every fleet, every operation moved with quiet determination. They followed plans created weeks ago, plans that anticipated nearly every response the aggressor could make. Humans had prepared for this day with patience, intelligence, and a steady focus that no other species had matched. Even the crews on the front lines felt the gravity of what they were doing, but not fear. They were confident, not reckless. They moved knowing that their actions would send a message that the galaxy could not ignore. They weren't trying to destroy. They were trying to restore balance. Their goal was clear: stop the aggressors and show that humans would never allow injustice against their own people to go unanswered. Meanwhile, the aggressor species scrambled to respond. They sent messages to their fleets, warning of human movements and preparing for confrontation. But every attempt to intercept or counter human actions failed. Humans anticipated their strategies. Humans knew their weaknesses. Humans were everywhere they needed to be, and nowhere the aggressor expected. It was a demonstration of discipline and planning that left their enemies bewildered. News of the first actions began to spread across the galaxy, quietly at first. Traders, explorers, and minor colonies picked up reports. The humans had struck, yes, but not indiscriminately. They had struck with intelligence, with strategy, and with an unmistakable message of strength. Species that had mocked humans in the past began to pay attention. Perhaps we were wrong, some said in private channels. Perhaps humans are not to be underestimated. Even the Galactic Council began to notice. though no official statements were made. The leaders of major species watched from afar, analyzing reports and trying to understand what had happened. For decades, they had assumed humans were inexperienced and emotional, but now they had to reconsider. Humans had not acted recklessly. Humans had acted with patience, planning, and an almost unnatural clarity. The council had dismissed them, underestimated them, and now they were being forced to face the consequences. In the middle of all this, the humans remained steady. They had not planned to make headlines or intimidate anyone unnecessarily. Their goal was to ensure safety for their people and to show that injustice against humanity could not go unchallenged. Every action was precise, every movement deliberate, and every decision thoughtful. The humans demonstrated a side of themselves the galaxy had rarely seen: disciplined, resolute, and fearless when protecting those they cared for. Back on the frontier, the attacked colony watched in awe as human reinforcements arrived. Defense systems that had been damaged were restored, and new technologies were installed to prevent future attacks. The colonists did not understand the full scale of the larger operation, but they felt safe in a way they had never felt before. Humans had a way of making those around them feel protected, even in the middle of conflict. They had come not to destroy, but to defend. At the same time, the humans prepared for potential retaliation. Every fleet movement considered multiple contingencies. If the aggressors tried to strike back, humans were ready. If neighboring systems tried to intervene, humans had strategies to prevent collateral damage. This was not chaos or emotion. It was preparation, foresight, and careful planning. They acted as guardians, but guardians who would not be underestimated. Other species across the galaxy began to take note. Traders paused shipments, scouts altered routes, and some smaller colonies began to seek alliances with humans. They didn't fully understand why, but there was a growing sense that humans were different than anyone had believed. This was not a reckless species driven by emotion. This was a species capable of organized, patient, and intelligent response. The galaxy was beginning to see humanity in a new light. Even the aggressor species struggled to understand what was happening. Their fleets were confused, their command centers were disrupted, and their plans were being systematically dismantled without chaos. Humans struck with precision, and every strike was aimed at reducing the ability to cause harm. There were no mistakes, no unnecessary destruction, and no civilian casualties. Humanity was showing that they were not only strong, but also disciplined, and just got through all of this. Humans maintained communication with one another, but they did not broadcast warnings or demands to the galaxy. They acted silently, letting their actions speak louder than words. That silence, paradoxically, amplified their presence. Species across multiple systems began to pay closer attention, trying to understand how humans could act so decisively and calmly. The council, still watching from afar, could no longer ignore what was happening. Delegates began asking questions, analyzing reports, and reconsidering past assumptions. They realized that dismissing humans had been a grave mistake. For the first time, they faced a species that combined patience, intelligence, and a strong moral compass with the ability to act decisively when necessary. Humans were not emotional, reckless beings. Humans were something more. Meanwhile, the humans themselves remained focused on their goal: defend their people and prevent further attacks. They moved through the galaxy like a precise machine, each part working in harmony with the others. They did not seek glory, they did not seek revenge, and they did not seek recognition. They simply acted to protect and to ensure fairness. And that quiet determination sent a message far stronger than any threat could. Humanity could not be ignored or dismissed. By the end of this first phase of action, the galaxy had begun to understand that humans were different. They were not only capable of responding to aggression, but they were capable of doing so in a way that was calculated, intelligent, and disciplined. Humans had set a standard that few species could match. They had begun their reprisal without creating unnecessary chaos, without harming innocents, and without shouting to the galaxy about what they were doing. And yet, the message was clear. If humans were pushed, if their people were harmed, if injustice continued, they were ready to respond. This was not a threat born of anger. It was a promise born of duty, responsibility, and protection. Humans had proven that they would not be underestimated again. As the weeks passed, humans continued to consolidate their positions, reinforce their fleets, and monitor the aggressor species. They did not celebrate victories. They did not boast of accomplishments. They moved steadily, always prepared, always focused, and always in control. The galaxy had begun to see them not as newcomers, not as emotional beings, but as a force to be reckoned with, disciplined, intelligent, and unwavering. By the time the Council fully realized the scale of human actions, it was too late to dismiss them. Humans had quietly, efficiently, and decisively begun a reprisal that the galaxy had never seen before. The Council had underestimated them, and the consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. Humanity was no longer just a participant in galactic politics. They were a power that demanded respect, a species that could protect itself, and a people that would not allow injustice to stand. The first strikes of the human reprisal had begun. The galaxy was watching, and the message was unmistakable. Humans were ready, humans were capable, and humanity could no longer be dismissed. As humanity's precise response unfolded across the galaxy, word of their actions began to spread. At first, it was quiet whispers, small messages between traders, scouts, and minor colonies. But soon, the reports grew impossible to ignore. Other species began to realize that humans were not behaving like any other race they had encountered. Humans were organized, disciplined, and strangely calm, even in the face of aggression. They weren't just reacting, they were orchestrating every movement with intelligence and purpose. The Galactic Council was among the first to feel the pressure. Delegates who had once dismissed humans as inexperienced or emotional now scrambled to understand what was happening. Reports flooded in from distant systems, human ships patrolling areas that had never been patrolled before, frontier colonies fortified, supply lines redirected, and sensors activated in places thought irrelevant. Every report contained the same theme. Humans were moving, planning, and ready for anything. The Council could no longer treat humans as if they were insignificant. Council members argued among themselves, trying to downplay the situation. They are still a young species, some said. They have never faced a true war. Others disagreed. This is not simple defense. Look at their coordination. Look at the speed of their response. They are preparing something we cannot predict. These discussions, normally calm and routine, now carried a tension that had rarely been seen in the council halls. For centuries, delegates had assumed humans would always be minor players. Now they were learning how wrong they had been. Across the galaxy, neutral species watched closely. Traders who relied on human routes noticed unusual activity, but instead of fear, they felt respect. Humans were not reckless or violent. They were disciplined and deliberate. Even minor colonies that had been ignored for decades now felt the presence of humans in a protective way. Humans had a reputation for fairness, and even in the middle of this reprisal, they acted with integrity. No unnecessary destruction, no harm to civilians, only precise actions against those who had caused injustice. The aggressor species, the one responsible for attacking the human colony, began to panic. Their fleets scrambled to respond to human movements, but every attempt to intercept or counter the humans failed. Humans anticipated their strategies, studied their tactics, and knew exactly where they would strike. Every defensive measure the aggressors tried was met with patience and precision rather than brute force. Humans did not rush, they waited for the perfect moment to act. council members began receiving confidential reports from observers in multiple sectors. "Humans are operating with strategy we did not expect," one report read. "They are not emotional. They are precise. They are calm. And yet, they are ready for anything." Panic began to ripple through the chambers. For the first time, the council understood that dismissing humans had been a mistake. They had assumed that humans could be controlled through diplomacy alone. They had assumed that humans would accept injustice without retaliation. Now, it was clear that assumption had been deadly. Even allies of the aggressor species began to reconsider their position. They had once laughed at human colonies, believing them defenseless. Now, they watched with a mixture of fear and awe. Humans were demonstrating coordination, intelligence, and discipline that few species could match. Their patience, previously mistaken for inexperience, was now revealed as a form of strength. Humans were not weak. They were strategic, loyal, and relentless when protecting their own. Meanwhile, humans themselves remained calm. They did not boast about their accomplishments. They did not send messages threatening retaliation. They simply acted. Every fleet, every ship, every crew member followed instructions with precision. Humans had planned every possible scenario, considering multiple outcomes for every action. Their movements were deliberate, careful, and effective. This was not chaos. This was controlled, intelligent action. Observers from other species tried to interpret human behavior. Some were confused. "Why are they so patient?" One asked. "Why do they not attack more aggressively?" Another replied, "That is the point. They are intelligent. They will strike with precision when necessary, but they will not waste resources or risk lives needlessly." Slowly, the galaxy began to realize that humans were unlike any other species they had encountered. Humans combined intelligence, strategy, and loyalty in a way that made them unpredictable and formidable. As the weeks passed, human actions continued to impress and unsettle observers. Frontier colonies that had once seemed vulnerable were now reinforced and protected. Supply lines were secure. Fleet movements were calculated to anticipate enemy actions. Humans were not only defending themselves, they were demonstrating a capability the galaxy had long underestimated. And the message was clear. Humanity could not be ignored, dismissed, or controlled. Inside the council chambers, delegates argued over what to do. Some urged caution, suggesting that humans were only protecting their colonies and would soon stop. Others warned that humans had shown their true capabilities and that ignoring them any longer could be catastrophic. For the first time in history, the council could not agree. Humans had changed the rules of engagement simply by being themselves organized, determined, and unyielding in protecting their own. Across multiple systems, species began to take precautions. They strengthened defenses, monitored human fleets, and reconsidered old prejudices. The galaxy had underestimated humans for centuries, assuming that their emotions and curiosity were weaknesses. Now, it was clear that humans had qualities no one had fully understood: patience, loyalty, intelligence, and the ability to act decisively when necessary. Back at the frontier colonies, humans continued their work. They repaired damaged infrastructure, reinforced defenses, and ensured the safety of civilians. Colonists who had once felt vulnerable now felt secure. They saw human fleets moving in the distance and knew their people were protected. For the first time, many realized that humans were not just explorers or traders. They were guardians, willing to act when others would not. The aggressor species, meanwhile, struggled to respond. Their fleets were in disarray, command structures were disrupted, and their strategies were being dismantled with precision rather than chaos. Every action humans took was calculated, and every movement sent a clear signal. Humanity was prepared for any future aggression. The aggressors could not understand how humans anticipated their every move without acting recklessly. Through all of this, humans maintained focus and discipline. They did not let their actions be driven by anger or revenge. Their purpose was simple: protect their people, restore fairness, and prevent future harm. Every fleet movement, every reinforcement, every defensive measure was guided by this principle. They did not need to shout to the galaxy. Their actions spoke for themselves, louder than any declaration could dot. As news of human actions spread, other species began to rethink their assumptions. Humans were no longer the naive, emotional species many had believed. They were intelligent, strategic, and capable of organized, patient, and decisive action. The galaxy had long underestimated them, and now it was learning just how wrong those assumptions had been. Even the council members, who had once dismissed humans, now faced the reality of their capabilities. They had assumed that diplomacy alone could control the human response, that patience and reason would be enough to keep humans in line. But humans had demonstrated something different, a combination of intelligence, strategy, and loyalty that no other species had shown. The Council could no longer ignore them, and the galaxy had to accept a new reality. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with. Through all of this, humans remained disciplined. They did not seek recognition, they did not seek glory, and they did not seek revenge. They acted calmly, steadily, and with purpose. Their actions were not meant to intimidate for the sake of fear. They were meant to show that injustice against their people would not go unanswered. Every move was deliberate, and every action sent a message that humans were not to be underestimated. By the end of this phase, the galaxy had begun to understand the true power of humanity. Frontier colonies were secure, fleets were organized, and the aggressor species was on alert. The Council had been forced to reconsider its assumptions, and other species had begun to see humans in a new light. Humans were no longer just participants in galactic politics. They were capable of shaping events, defending their people, and acting with intelligence, discipline, and moral clarity. The shock of humanity's actions had spread across multiple sectors. Observers, traders, and even rival species were beginning to pay attention. Humans had not caused unnecessary chaos, but they had demonstrated control, intelligence, and strength. The galaxy had long assumed that humans were reckless, emotional, and inexperienced. Now, humans were showing qualities that few had anticipated: patience, foresight, and the ability to act decisively when it mattered most. And through it all, humans remained calm, focused, and human. They acted with intelligence, strategy, and loyalty to their own people. They did not seek destruction, and they did not act out of anger. They acted to protect, to restore balance, and to show the galaxy that they were not a species to be underestimated. The galaxy was watching. The Council was watching, and even those who had once mocked humanity were beginning. After weeks of quiet, precise, and calculated movements, humanity returned to the Galactic Council. But this time, they came not as petitioners, not as diplomats asking for fairness, but as a force whose actions had already spoken louder than any words could. The council chambers, which had long been filled with routine discussions and polite disagreements, now held a tension unlike anything in history. Delegates from dozens of species waited, uncertain, uneasy, and for some, a little fearful. The human delegation entered calmly. There was no shouting, no grand displays, no threats. They carried data, reports, and recordings of the events at the frontier colonies and the aggressor species movements. Every piece of evidence had been meticulously gathered, verified, and stored. The humans placed the data before the council without fanfare, letting the proof speak for itself. The room fell silent. No one dared interrupt. The council members scanned the evidence, unable to look away. The recordings clearly showed the attack on the human colony, the loss and suffering of innocent civilians, and the calculated steps humans had taken to respond. Unlike anything the council had expected, the humans had acted with restraint. Every move was precise. Every strike targeted military or strategic assets, never civilians or neutral territories. Delegates whispered among themselves, realizing that humans had not only protected their people, but had done so without causing unnecessary destruction. Some council members tried to speak, attempting to challenge or dismiss the evidence, but the humans remained calm. They did not argue or raise their voices. They simply presented the facts, showing clearly the timeline of events, the attacks they had suffered, and the exact steps they had taken to respond. They had anticipated every argument the council could make and had documentation ready for every point. It was a masterful display of preparation, intelligence, and discipline. For centuries, the council had believed humans were young, emotional, and inexperienced. They had assumed humans would rely on diplomacy, plead for fairness, and accept decisions even when unjust. Now, they saw that those assumptions had been completely wrong. Humans were capable of intelligence, strategy, and moral clarity that few other species could match. The shock in the room was palpable. Delegates who had once mocked humanity now struggled to maintain composure. The human spokesperson, speaking in a calm and clear voice, summarized the situation. They did not boast. They did not demand apologies. They stated the facts simply. The colony had been attacked, lives had been lost, and the council had failed to act. Humanity had responded to protect its own, and in doing so, had demonstrated both restraint and capability. The message was unmistakable. If the council continued to ignore injustice, humans would continue to enforce fairness themselves. Some council members began to murmur, realizing that the humans were not threatening them out of anger, but were setting boundaries that could not be crossed. Humanity had acted responsibly, decisively, and without unnecessary aggression, yet their presence now dominated the room. Even species that had once considered humans irrelevant now felt a quiet unease. Humans were not reckless, but they were formidable. The evidence also included strategic insights. Humans had tracked the aggressor species' fleet movements, calculated supply routes, and reinforced their own colonies in ways that demonstrated both foresight and intelligence. They had acted not with haste or recklessness, but with careful planning. Every observer in the council chambers could see that humanity had anticipated multiple outcomes and had prepared solutions for each. The sophistication of their actions was unlike anything the council had ever witnessed from a so-called young species. As the council reviewed the evidence, humans waited silently. They did not shout, they did not demand, and they did not react to the rising tension. Their calm presence only amplified the impact of what had been done. Every report, every recording, every data point reinforced the same truth. Humans were not to be underestimated. They had the intelligence to plan, the discipline to execute, and the moral conviction to act justly. The delegates began to realize that they had been wrong for centuries. Humans were not impulsive or weak. They were capable of defending themselves, protecting their people, and acting decisively when necessary. Even those who had assumed humans would retaliate recklessly had to admit that the human response had been measured, precise, and responsible. It was not aggression. It was a demonstration of capability and principle. The council's leader finally spoke, breaking the silence. Their voice was calm, but carried a weight of acknowledgement. They asked questions, not in challenge, but in curiosity and concern. How had humans anticipated every move? How had they managed to act so decisively across multiple sectors? How had they maintained such discipline while responding to aggression? The human spokesperson answered each question with clarity and precision, never raising their voice, never showing emotion beyond calm determination. It became clear that humans had fundamentally changed the way the galaxy would view them. The council could no longer dismiss humanity as inexperienced or naive. Humans had shown that they were capable of intelligence, foresight, discipline, and moral responsibility. They could act decisively to protect their own, and they could do so without causing unnecessary chaos. The lesson was clear. Humans were a species that demanded respect. The shock was not just within the council chambers. Across the galaxy, other species began to discuss the events. Traders, minor colonies, and even rival species shared reports and whispered observations. Humans had acted with intelligence and restraint. Humans had defended their own. Humans had demonstrated that they were not to be underestimated. A quiet but growing recognition spread. Humanity had changed the rules. They were no longer just newcomers. They were guardians of their people, capable of action that few could rival. Even the aggressor species, now forced to confront the consequences of their actions, began to understand the power they had underestimated. Their fleets were weakened, their strategies disrupted, and their command structures had been exposed to human precision. They realized that humans had not acted recklessly, but had instead struck where it was most effective, demonstrating intelligence, discipline, and a willingness to protect their own people without causing unnecessary harm. The Council convened emergency meetings to discuss the implications. How could they continue to underestimate a species that had demonstrated such foresight, strategy, and moral clarity? How could they continue to assume humans would respond only with words or diplomacy? Across multiple chambers, delegates debated, argued, and reconsidered their assumptions. Humanity had forced them to see a truth they had long ignored. Humans were capable, disciplined, and unyielding when protecting their own dot as discussions continued. Humans remained present, observing without interference. They did not seek to dominate the conversation or demand attention. Their presence alone was enough. Every member of the council could see the difference between humans and other species: patience, intelligence, discipline, and moral clarity. The humans had acted, and now the council had no choice but to acknowledge the new reality. The evidence, the strategy, and the restraint of humanity left a lasting impression. No one could deny what had been done, or the level of planning and intelligence that had gone into it. Even species that had once mocked humanity or considered them irrelevant now recognized their strength. Humans had shown that they were capable of protecting their people, acting decisively, and doing so with integrity. They had demonstrated a level of discipline and foresight that few could rival. Finally, the human spokesperson summarized their position. They did not demand apologies or recognition. They did not boast or threaten. They stated plainly that humans had acted to protect their people, to restore balance, and to demonstrate that injustice would not be tolerated. Their actions were guided by principle, intelligence, and loyalty. And the message was unmistakable. Humanity could not be ignored or underestimated. The room fell silent. Delegates from multiple species exchanged glances, realizing that the humans had fundamentally changed the dynamics of the galaxy. They had demonstrated capability, discipline, and moral conviction. They had acted decisively, yet responsibly. They had shown that humans were not naive, reckless, or inexperienced. They were strategic, intelligent, and unyielding in defense of their own. For the first time, the Council understood that dismissing humans had been a mistake. Humanity had acted, and their actions had spoken louder than any words. The message was clear. The galaxy must respect humans, their people, and their principles. Humans had shown that they were capable of acting decisively, intelligently, and with moral clarity. They had set a new standard, and the Council could no longer ignore it. The shock of humanity's return to the Council was felt across multiple sectors. Other species began to reconsider their assumptions, their alliances, and their attitudes toward humans. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for centuries, but that underestimation was now impossible. Humans had acted with intelligence, discipline, and integrity, and the consequences were undeniable. And through it all, humans remained calm, focused, and human. They did not seek glory. They did not seek revenge. They acted to protect, to restore balance, and to demonstrate that injustice could not be to. After humanity had returned to the Council with clear evidence and precision, the galaxy slowly began to shift. The shock of what humans had done did not fade quickly. The Council had been forced to recognize a new reality. Humans were not to be underestimated. They had proven intelligence, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to protect their own. But the full impact of their actions was only beginning to be understood. In the weeks following the human demonstration, colonies across the frontier felt a new sense of security. Human fleets remained vigilant, but they were not threatening. They were present, steady, and calm. The civilians who had once feared for their lives now walked freely, knowing that humans had taken measures to ensure their protection. Small settlements that had been overlooked for decades now had defenses, supply lines, and communication networks in place. Humans had quietly rebuilt and reinforced everything that mattered. Other species observed this carefully. They noted that humans had not retaliated recklessly. They did not launch wide-scale attacks. They had responded to aggression with precise, calculated actions. The galaxy had expected humans to act emotionally, to lash out, or to overreact. Instead, humanity had acted with strategy and moral clarity. Every movement, every decision, and every preparation had been made with purpose. Even their restraint became a display of power. The Council itself began to change. Delegates who had once ignored or dismissed humans now treated them with respect. Meetings that had once been routine were now conducted with caution. Every word, every motion, and every vote considered the humans' demonstrated abilities. Some council members quietly admitted to themselves that they had misjudged a species they had assumed would follow the usual patterns of diplomacy. Humans had introduced a new factor that could not be ignored. Humans did not seek control over the Council. They did not demand dominance or authority. They wanted fairness, security, and recognition that the Council could not ignore injustice. Their approach was calm but firm. They made it clear that they would not tolerate attacks on their people, and they demonstrated the ability to respond when necessary. This quiet strength shifted the balance of power in ways the galaxy had not anticipated. In many sectors, species began to rethink alliances. Traders, explorers, and smaller colonies sought human guidance or protection. The humans had proven that they could act effectively, decisively, and ethically. Their reputation grew not because of fear, but because of respect. People began to understand that humans were dependable, disciplined, and intelligent. Trust in humanity increased, and many who had previously doubted them began to seek partnerships. The aggressor species, once confident and dismissive, was forced to reassess its strategy. Its fleets had been weakened, supply lines disrupted, and command structures exposed. Leaders who had assumed humans could be bullied or ignored now realized that humanity had the capability and resolve to enforce justice. The aggressors tried to negotiate quietly, but the humans maintained their calm and consistent stance. They were willing to protect their people, but did not act rashly. This combination of power and restraint changed the entire dynamic in the region. Meanwhile, human colonies across the galaxy thrived. They were connected in ways they had never been before, with improved communication systems, supply networks, and defense coordination. Humans ensured that every colony had access to protection and resources. The systems that had been slow or inefficient are now streamlined and effective. The galaxy could see that humans valued their people, and their actions reflected a commitment to care for all under their responsibility. Even the council structure began to feel the effects of humanity's actions. Delegates had to consider humans in every decision, whether it involved trade, territory, or conflict resolution. Policies were reviewed with the recognition that humans would act decisively if their people were harmed. Decisions that had once been taken lightly now carried a new weight. Humans had demonstrated a power that did not rely on intimidation or fear, but on intelligence, planning, and moral authority. Across the galaxy, whispers grew into recognition. Other species began to tell stories of humanity's actions, not as myths or exaggerations, but as clear accounts of intelligence and courage. Traders spoke of secure routes, colonies spoke of rebuilt defenses, and scouts spoke of precision in fleet movements. The stories painted humans as a species that combined intelligence, strategy, and ethical responsibility in a way the galaxy had rarely seen. For humans themselves, life returned to a sense of calm normality, though they remained vigilant. They continued to protect their colonies, maintain communication networks, and monitor potential threats. Humans had no desire for conflict beyond what was necessary to protect their people. Their power was quiet, disciplined, and grounded in responsibility rather than aggression. The galaxy began to recognize that this was a new kind of strength, a force built not on fear, but on intelligence, preparation, and moral clarity. Some species tried to test humanity, hoping to provoke a reaction or take advantage of perceived weaknesses. Each time, humans responded predictably and decisively. There was no panic, no overreaction, and no unnecessary escalation. Their actions sent a clear message. Humans valued justice, protection, and ethical responsibility. They would act when necessary, but they would never act recklessly. This combination of qualities established humans as a respected and reliable power. Back in the council, delegates adjusted their expectations. Humans were no longer the newcomers to be dismissed or ignored. They were a species whose actions had reshaped relationships, policies, and perceptions. Council chambers, which had once been filled with polite dismissals and routine procedures, now carried a quiet awareness of human capability. Humans were not the loudest or the most aggressive, but they had the most profound impact. As the months passed, humanity's influence grew without the need for domination. Colonies prospered under improved protection. Trade routes became more reliable with human coordination. Conflicts that might have escalated were often prevented because humans had demonstrated their readiness and capacity to respond intelligently. Other species began to appreciate the value of diplomacy paired with capability. Humanity had changed the way the galaxy understood strength. Even the aggressor species, once defiant, now sought to repair relations cautiously. They recognized that humans would act if provoked, but did so with precision and purpose rather than chaos. Attempts at intimidation were met with calculated responses. Humans did not seek to humiliate or destroy. They sought to ensure fairness and prevent harm. This consistency in behavior earned respect even from former enemies. The long-term effect was clear. Humanity had established a new standard for how a species could influence the galaxy. They combined intelligence, discipline, moral clarity, and loyalty to their people in a way that reshaped expectations. Other species had once underestimated humans, dismissed them, or assumed they were weak. Now, those assumptions were gone. Humans had earned a place of respect through careful action, resilience, and ethical consistency. In colonies across the galaxy, humans looked to the future with confidence, but not arrogance. They continued to explore, trade, and build, but always with vigilance. They strengthened communication, reinforced defenses, and maintained fleets ready to protect the innocent. Humanity had learned that preparation, strategy, and discipline were as powerful as any weapon, and they used this knowledge to safeguard their people and allies. The Galactic Council itself changed subtly. Policies were revised to include consideration of human capabilities. Delegates now treated humans with a mix of respect and caution. They understood that humans would act if necessary, and they knew that any attempt to undermine or dismiss humanity could provoke consequences. Humans had not sought this power, but their actions had ensured that it was recognized. Across the galaxy, humans were increasingly seen as protectors rather than mere participants. Colonies felt safer, traders moved with confidence, and smaller species saw humans as allies. The galaxy had underestimated humans for centuries, but humanity had proven that intelligence, discipline, and moral conviction could overcome prejudice and assumptions. Their actions had shown a new path: strength through responsibility, power through preparation, and influence through ethical action. In the end, humanity had not only protected its people, but had reshaped the galaxy's understanding of them. The Council, once dismissive, now treated humans as equals and acknowledged their capabilities. Colonies flourished under improved safety and coordination. Even former aggressors approached with caution and respect. Humans had shown that they could act decisively, intelligently, and ethically. And that combination of qualities was now recognized across the galaxy. The aftermath of humanity's actions created a lasting legacy. The frontier colonies were stronger than ever. Trade routes were secure, and the Council had learned that dismissing a species could carry consequences. Humans had set a standard that would influence interstellar relations for generations. Their restraint, discipline, intelligence, and loyalty became a model for how a species could protect its people and maintain moral clarity while still achieving powerful results. Humans themselves returned to daily life, but they remained vigilant. They continued to protect Colony,